Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com and managing director of Tinnitus Classics. And it is my great pleasure to be able to talk to you about our latest release on Tinnitus Classics, and that is the first ever recording, and it's a complete recording, all 2 and a bit hours worth, of Auber's The Critique of Pure Reason. Yes, La critique de la raison pure, that's it, ou les choses en soi, or the thing in itself. And this was an absolutely fascinating project that really, it's the fulfillment of one of my life's ambitions. It really was. And I need to describe to you how this thing came to fulfillment because the story is just extraordinary. In fact, I presented the existence of this particular ballet and its history at a meeting of the American Musicological Society New York chapter back in, I think it was 2017. And it was just a thrill to be able to talk about this particular work to a group of serious scholars, real scholars, and to do an actual research paper. And so before talking about the recording itself specifically, I want to present to you the paper that I read at that meeting of the American Musicological Society, exactly as I read it there. This is a scholarly paper, and so I beg your indulgence if it's not my usual form of entertainment, because this is very serious business, and I wrote it very seriously and presented it that way. And so, but it's fascinating. It's such a fascinating story. So let me get right to the actual presentation of this magnificent ballet by Auber, which is hitherto completely unknown. Auber's Critique de la raison pure and the decline of the Ballet Philosophique. On March 3rd, 1822, the curtain rose for the first and only time on Daniel François Esprit Auber's Critique de la raison pure ou la chose en soi, the Critique of Pure Reason, or the thing in itself, a full-length 3-act ballet based on Immanuel Kant's philosophical masterpiece. As you can plainly hear from the brief excerpt just played from the overture, the music immediately establishes the strong dialectical contrast that will characterize the entire work. Auber and his librettist Eugène Scribe scarcely could have known that the production represented the last and most ambitious in an illustrious line of Ballet Philosophique, stretching all the way back to Rameau's 1749 Zoroastre. And there's Auber himself, the man. Auber is not known as a ballet composer, actually. He only wrote one other large-scale work in the medium, Marco's Spada, which Richard Bonning has recorded, which is rather exciting. But many of his operas include anything from individual dances to lengthy ballet scenes and divertissement. His colleague, Eugène Scribe, wrote dozens of librettos for everything for everyone, from Auber, Meyerbeer, Boieldieu to Rossini, Donizetti, and Verdi. He was the Metastasio of his day. Metastasio being, the Baroque librettist that everybody set a million librettos a million times. He was enormously popular and successful. The actual genre Ballet Philosophique postdated Zoroastre. Rameau did not know it, and his English biographer, Cuthbert Girdlestone, makes no mention of it. French musicologist Louise Brioche traces the term back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau's ballet Du Contrat Social of 1762, The Social Contract. Set to his own music, Rousseau's scenario is a love story depicting the initial conflict and eventual reconciliation between the prima ballerina, who portrays la civilisation, and la sauvage noble, the noble savage. Other philosophically inspired ballets followed at sporadic intervals. And here they are. I have a list of them for you to look at. What all of these ballets have in common is a cast that includes at least some characters representing not people, but ideas or philosophical constructs, including such notions as republicanism, totalitarianism, hedonism, civilization, the state of nature, the rule of law, and like concepts. In order to portray these ideas as things apart from the ordinary, stock ballet figures, choreographers from ordinary stock ballet figures, choreographers evolved a strongly gestural language rooted in pantomime and symbolic movement. The scenarios themselves, however, were seldom philosophically pure. As Girdlestone points out, even Rameau was forced to revise the original Zoroastra in 1756 in order to incorporate a conventional love interest. Thus, Rousseau's female, civilisation, is thoroughly anthropomorphized. She loves to go shopping. Grétry's divertissement, based on Descartes, treats both thought and the concept of being. There it is, you see it there. Je pense donc je suis of 1782. He treats both thought and being as characters straight out of the Commedia dell'arte tradition. The Marquis de Sade's La philosophie dans le boudoir runs the opposite direction. The participants are all human, sort of, but they interrupt their indulgence in scenes of grotesque sexual debauchery to express a ringing endorsement of republicanism, notwithstanding which the piece was banned before the second performance. Gossek's Machiavellian ballet, Le Prince, Il Principe, the Machiavellian ballet was commissioned by Josephine as a birthday present for Napoleon. It was a particular favorite of his, and as a concession to his patroness, the composer naturally had to give the prince his princess at the work's conclusion. Finally, in keeping with the conservative spirit of the Bourbon Restoration, Boieldieu's frothy evocation of Montesquieu's de l'esprit des lois, the spirit of the laws, spends an inordinate amount of time detailing the proper customs of marriage and conjugal relations, no doubt with an eye on the scandal caused by the earlier work of the Marquis de Sade. The medium had some cleaning up to do after that one. All of which brings us to Kant. Where on earth did Scribe and Auber get the idea for a ballet based on the Critique of Pure Reason? The simple truth is that we don't know, and the closer we look, the stranger the story becomes. We do know that Kant was a serious balletomane. He really was. Evidently, he was serious about everything. He even attempted to produce a dance scenario for the Critique himself. Professor Wolfgang Brautschleimer at the Leipzig Kant Stiftung kindly furnished this author with a hitherto unpublished sketch that clearly reveals the philosopher's intentions. And here it is. I was able to get this for this presentation for the first time ever, and no one was aware of it among Kant's writings. As you can see, it's shredded and very old. And it shows that Kant liked to doodle when he was working on things. You see like the little flowers on the right and Mama and Papa on the left. And he has some very interesting concepts in amongst the headings for sections of the Critique of Pure Reason. You see, for example, that he says that he wanted to have a facultance or a torch dance rhythm, and then he indicates where the divertissement is supposed to be, towards the bottom there, and the pas de deux, which is really rather fascinating. And all of these tie in to major sections in the Critique of Pure Reason. We also know that at one point Kant had approached Goethe in the hopes of presenting the dance version of the Critique as a double bill with the so-called Urfaust. To the philosopher's abject disappointment, Goethe wasn't interested. He reported the whole story in an often overlooked letter to Friedrich Schiller, written in May 1799. And here it is. Here's the letter, the original letter. The German is on the top. And the English translation, which I made, is on the bottom. You will note that they refer to each other by English nicknames, which is rather fascinating, similar to the way Tchaikovsky did with his cousins or friends or lovers or whoever they were. Anyway, here's how the letter reads. My dearest, most reverend, beloved Freddie, how are you? Is it true that I hear you finally finished the Wallenstein trilogy? I can't wait to see it. I had lunch a little while ago with Kant, and you're not going to believe it, Manny actually suggested staging my Faust with a ballet version of his critique of pure reason. Is this possible? I thought he was kidding, but evidently not. He was serious. He must be nuts. No, he's totally out of his mind. See you soon. With friendly greetings, John. It's a very, very fascinating and important piece of historical evidence that nobody has paid attention to because they really couldn't figure out what he was talking about. They thought Goethe was just joking with Schiller because the two of them had that very jocular relationship to one another. It's a shame that German-American scholar and philosopher Walter Kaufmann seems to have overlooked Kant's fondness for the ballet as well as his intentions for the critique of pure reason. Doubtless he would have been forced to reconsider the accusation of extreme insensitivity to art alleged in Kaufmann's 1980 study of Goethe, Kant, and Hegel. That's volume 1 of his trilogy Discovering the Mind. In the event, Kant died about 5 years after his lunch with Goethe, his vision unfulfilled. What remains so remarkable about the seemingly casual bit of doodling he left behind is just how close it comes to the scenario that Scribe finally adopted. It really is kind of remarkable. Here is a little bit of that original scenario that they came up with. There it is. Now, this is the organization of Act 1, and you see the principal numbers are in red, and the divertissement section is in blue, so you can see how closely that actually tracks the critique of pure reason. For example, Kant marked the section labeled Transcendentale Elementare Lehre, there we go, as a divertissement. And this is precisely what Scribe did in arranging Act 1 of the completed scenario. He also included both the minuet and the polonaise that Kant mentioned, although curiously these are not danced by any of the critique's main characters, but rather by the Act 2 love interest, a rustic interloper called Popular Moral Philosophy, who comes from another book entirely, Kant's Fundamental Principles of the Metaphysics of Morals of 1785. The critique by itself offers very few opportunities for romantic entanglement. There is only a brief but playful dalliance toward the start of Act 3 between the thing in itself, les choses en soi, and the categorical imperative, l'impératif catégorique. These facts raise two possibilities. Either the critique was imagined as a potential ballet from the very start and organized accordingly, or else Scribe knew of Kant's intentions. French Scribe authority, the late Maurice d'Escargot, shed some light on this matter, pointing out that the librettist's mother had family in Königsberg on friendly terms with the Kant family, so it is just possible that somehow knowledge of the project trickled back to France. However imperfectly it may have been transmitted. Additionally, the rediscovery of Auber and Scribe's Kant ballet lends credence to d'Escargot's claim that the librettist was a devoted Kantophile, a thesis received with incredulity when originally proposed back in the 1960s. Virtually nothing is known about the ballet's actual composition. Both Auber and Scribe were near the start of their respective careers, as was premier danseuse Marie Taglioni, who, as Sylvia Kahan notes in her recent study of the Taglioni family dynasty and its impact on French musical culture, she would later become one of the leading lights of the Parisian stage. She was particularly famous for inventing the tutu, the short little skirt which caused a scandal when she first used it, but which exposed a lot of leg but allowed her to dance with far more freedom. Their work, anyway, Scribe and Auber, was not yet deemed worthy. It wasn't noteworthy at the time. Indeed, we only know of Taglioni's participation because of an anonymous contemporary portrait of her in costume as les choses en soi, das Ding an sich, or the thing in itself. And here is the actual portrait of her dancing in the Critique of Pure Reason. There you go. Until 2014, it was believed that Les Choses en Soi was not the character being danced, but rather the title of the painting. No one had an inkling of the ballet's existence. It isn't mentioned in Robert Ignatius Letelier's 2011 comprehensive study of Auber's ballet music. Ultimately, the conductor's score and the orchestral parts of the complete work were discovered moldering away in the Bibliothèque Nationale by French musicologist Cécile Crevette-Meunier. One of the most remarkable aspects of Auber's score is just how faithfully he managed to mirror and evoke Kant's original text. As you saw already from the overview in Act 1, in order to bring the work to within manageable length, the more than 900-page original had to be cut down considerably. Nevertheless, Auber truly captures the essence of Kant's magnum opus, nowhere more so than in the second Antinomy pas de deux, where the dialectical cut and thrust of Kant's argument finds a perfect counterpart in the music itself, die Musik an sich, you might say. Here is another point where Scribe's libretto also follow Kant's original sketch. The music for this scene Auber actually reused later on, but some of it was unique to this ballet. And I think it's wonderful to be able to play it for you for the very, very first time. Just in a moment, we'll do that. But first, we want to see the origins of the music and how it reflects the thesis and antithesis dichotomy of Kant's original tome. In fact, there are two characters in the ballet called Thesis and Antithesis, and in the Pas de Deux, they dance this particular antinomy, along with the later participation of Les Choses en Soi, Madame Taglioni. She joins them at the end, and then the entire corps de ballet comes on for a rousing finale. A note in the score suggests that Kant's actual text, translated into French naturally, was distributed to the audience so they could actually follow along with the action. I provide it in English for your enjoyment. Here is the text that Auber set to music in this particular Pas de Deux. And of course, it's in English. As we listen, consider just how Kant describes the first idea, the thesis. It's a complex structural compound of simple repetitive musical gestures, whereas the antithesis consists of an indivisible stream of running violin figurations. Their eventual combination results not in the expected dialectical synthesis, but rather, as Kant demonstrates, in a proof of the equal validity of both propositions. This is an especially telling example of Kantian epistemology in tones. So let's listen to a little bit of the Pas de Deux. Practically the only element of Kant's ballet scenario that Scribe and Auber did not adopt was the Fackeltanz, or torch dance. It could be this genre was seen as too German. Meyerbeer, however, composed at least 2 Fackeltänze as independent works, and since Scribe was the librettist on all of his major French operas, it's not unreasonable to suppose that Kant inspired these pieces as well, however indirectly. Despite the philosophical depth of the music, which I think you can hear for itself, and the participation of so much obvious talent, Auber's ballet was evidently a failure. Nevertheless, the piece remains important for several other reasons. Much of the music was redistributed and found its way into other works by the same composer. Part of it, actually, wound up in his grand opera, La Muette de Portici. That's kind of remarkable. And the entree was retitled Guarache, or the Spanish Guaracha. The latter work has long been viewed as the first collaboration between Auber, Scribe, and Taglioni, but now we know that actually it was the second. This ballet was the first. Here is the original handbill for La Muette de Portici. There are still many mysteries waiting to be resolved in connection with Auber's philosophical ballet. How exactly was the music choreographed? What were the circumstances surrounding the premiere? Why is there not even a surviving handbill? It is not difficult to understand why the Ballet Philosophique, with its pretensions to high seriousness and its unapologetic intellectuality, could not satisfy the frivolous, increasingly bourgeois audiences of the 1820s. After the turmoil of the Napoleonic Wars, theater-goers wanted to laugh and cry, not to think, at least not too hard. Indeed, it remains one of the great artistic ironies of the age that the choreographic and musical modalities used to express the most sublime ideals of Enlightenment thought and the purity of Kant's original version only achieved fame and acceptance when adapted to portray the character of Fenella, the mute peasant girl in La Muette de Portici, who, by the way, was also danced by Taglioni. The existence of the ballet version of the Critique of Pure Reason permits us to isolate and identify the Kantian elements in Scribe's subsequent librettos for operas as varied as Le Bal Masqué, which of course is Verdi's Un ballo in Maschera, Manon Lescaut, Robert le Diable, the Sicilian Vespers, La Juife, and above all, Rossini's roughly contemporaneous Le Comte Ory, just as the dispersal of Auber's work among his subsequent dramas allows Kantian dialectics to permeate early French Romantic music. It was a conquest by stealth, perhaps, but a conquest all the same, and one that can no longer be ignored. And so, my friends, there you have it, Auber's second ballet, and the first that he actually composed, Kant's The Critique of Pure Reason, the last and greatest of the Ballet Philosophique, a subgenre of French classical ballet. And what a joy it is for me to be able to announce that this 2-disc set at a special price will be appearing on Tinnitus Classics in the next several months, I would think. We're putting the finishing touches on it. I hope you enjoyed listening to the samples, and I know that you're going to want to listen to that second antinomy pas de deux with the text in front of you, just as audiences in Auber's day did. I think that's just amazing, and unlike those frivolous people, you'll take this piece as seriously as it surely deserves to be. So, keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.